Recording in progress.
Oh, what did he say?
Okay, I want to call this meeting to order. The recording and/or broadcast of this meeting has been made at the direction of the board, which may capture images and sounds of those attending the meeting. Roll call. Vladimir.
Present.
Jessica.
Here.
Brian.
Here.
Shelley.
Here.
I'm also here. Let's do the pledge of allegiance.
Yeah.
I pledge allegiance
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
So the pre-meeting kind of a study session that we're going to go into. Does anyone have any comments on the agenda, questions before we open up this? Not seeing it. You want to keep it on?
Absolutely. So my apologies for not getting everything posted earlier. As you can imagine, along with our regular board meeting and then this board meeting, a lot of updating. So we were able to post today at 4 o'clock. So the public has access, but we're going to take a lot of time today. We have 90 minutes to dig in, go through.
Right.
Yes.
Point of order. I move agenda approval. just so
What do we have to do?
I think it's on the agenda.
Well, let's do it.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you.
I move we approve the agenda as presented.
All in favor?
Aye.
Sure.
Do we need a second?
second.
Sure. I think we all second
my
it.
God.
All second it. Moving on.
All right, sorry.
Study session.
All
Let's
right.
move on.
Here we are, study session. So as we decided what to kind of where to start, we started briefly a couple of meetings ago, but really thought it was a great idea to take the slide deck and materials that were developed for March 12th of 2020 and update what we could for right now, and then we'll see kind of how that rolls out. So if you look up there or look on your slide deck, we'll go along. The intention for today and as we move through this process is that all interested parties here and across our community have access to the same information. So tonight we're going to review the goals and guiding principles that were developed back before in this process, probably 2019. We're going to review kind of a history lesson of what has happened around facilities and the timeline. So we're going to take some time to look through that. We're going to briefly summarize the discussion that happened back in 2020 and understand where we are now. And finally, we're going to review the options, the analysis of the options that were kind of selected for review back in 2020 and talk about what do we know that has changed and what are we still waiting on, because we're still waiting on some more information. So that leads me to our next slide. So tonight is kind of the beginning of a process. For our December meeting, we really want to have the opportunity to focus on financials. We know that we need an update on where we are with our bond. As well as I'm hoping to reach out to Randy to get an update on our TDRs and really understand where we are with that. We know that construction costs across the globe have upticked since 2020 when some of these numbers were developed. So Eric is working with our architect and a couple of builders, I believe, on some updated construction costs. So any cost you see in here, I tried to highlight in red that these are all old costs. And then also on December 12th, we'll then bring together those options again, if that's what you would like to look at each of the options with costs included. And then when we hit January, as you know, we contracted with a new demographer because our demographer has retired. So they're in the middle of developing a new report for us. So we have current enrollment right now, and we're going to spend some time looking at that, but we don't have any projection of enrollment, any future forecasting. So that is something we're hope tentatively by the end of January to have that demographer's report available to us to look at closely, but we'll see if that's a realistic timeline. So as a reminder, I thought it was important to review the community engagement goals from 2019. We, of course, want widespread and diverse participation as we brought in the community to provide a whole lot of input. We wanted folks to understand the constraints and variables around permanent facilities for Bullis Charter School. You wanted the public to have lots of opportunities to share concerns, perspectives, and ideas. I think we ended up with, what was the magic number, 55 different ideas, and lots of concerns and perspectives shared during that process. And that last one there, how do we whittle things down to understand what the community supports and what really hits the mark to be the best solution or series of solutions for permanent facilities. The guiding principles that you all had developed, I wanted to bring these back to you as well. We, of course, always, number one, want to maintain academic excellence and equity for students. I think I would include safety in there as well. Protect our small neighborhood schools, provide long-term facilities for Bullis Charter School. We want to be responsive to data around enrollment, locations, and facility capacity. That's a lot of the work that we're going to look at tonight. We certainly want to protect the long-term viability of our school district and make sure that we're here for forever, and want to be responsive to community concerns that are listed there. So that is just a little intro to getting into the actual study session. Vladimir.
Just to quickly go back to the guiding principles.
Yep.
Are there any, are they in order, or are there different weights to any of them, or are they just?
You all tell me, because I believe that you developed these.
There was no, they had equal weight.
So Jessica was fantastic enough to update this document. So if you pull out this document, and it's up here for folks who are watching at home, the facilities history and context timeline. This was a document that was shared or kind of created for the community engagement process, because we still have many members of our community who don't really understand how we've gotten to where we've gotten, which is having 10 schools on 9 sites, and why there is an interest to have 10 schools on 10 sites, or a permanent location for Bullis Charter School.
I
So
don't use the term permanent
yes,
because it's long-term. I think it's the correct term,
long-term.
which I
Thank
prefer.
you.
Because I think we need flexibility. And
Absolutely.
moving forward, so just
Yeah,
down
I
and.
will use that. Thank you. So Jessica, do you want to talk a little bit about this document?
Yeah, what we did is we had the original document that we worked on with MIG for the public engagement process. And what we did was pick up from literally the end of the document. So what I did was include what happened with MIG. Most everything is in official actions, community participation. Most everything is in official actions. Legal activities would be lawsuits and whatnot. We have had no lawsuits involving any of this since 2019. So there's nothing in there. Community participation would be MIG, and the sites considered. We have in 2019 and 2020 how we whittled down during the process. In the official actions, again, we have the MIG stuff. We have letters going back and forth to BCS and the county relating to the Los Altos Hills preference. Also, notice that the county sent BCS about charter renewal and what they put them on notice for making sure that their population was equitable in our district. So that is, and Sandra added thankfully the enrollment, because that's not one that I had as easily available. Also included any of the purchase agreements for TDRs that we had signed in there, and for how much.
So you will notice that the original document goes through page 8. That was the document that's still posted on our website as part of the original community engagement process. And then I merged a new PDF into this PDF, which was not numbered. So you'll see then it looks somewhat similar, but a little bit different. So we have pages 9 through 12 there if you want to write your own page numbers on there. But that's really where those updates are on the last 2 front and back pages. Someone have some, maybe 10 minutes to read through the updates of those last 2 pages.
And for people following at home, you have put this online.
Yep, everything is
So
posted.
you could also read at home. If you go to our agenda online, you can download them from there.
Is there any questions on the? Ones need to be made? No, looking at all of you. They're gonna be so. Something look like it. To move forward.
People ready to move forward?
Yep.
All right. This was incredibly helpful for me, for somebody who wasn't here when this all started and wasn't fully into this topic in another position. So this was a very helpful document. Thank you, Jessica. All right, moving along. So to summarize where we were, where you all were in February of 2020, you had looked at 13 different scenarios. I think it was a variety of scenarios where you use your guiding principles. And then at that time, you directed staff to look more closely at 6 scenarios. So that's really the bulk of the work we're going to do tonight. And you can see those 6 scenarios here, which we'll get into each one in some depth. And the way you asked for that analysis was around operating and capital expense costs. So again, we still don't have that updated information. We hope to have that by December. Projected and campus enrollment numbers, we have more current enrollment, but still not that projected enrollment. Implementation timeline, I believe that this needs to be updated since, you know, everything pretty much paused for 18 months in the world. Impacts on long-term viability, we have some information tonight. What our data, current data is, and projections for changes of what that really looks like. So we'll get into those pieces. So to guide your discussion tonight, I suggest you think about, are there any scenarios that we're going to look at that you would like to add or modify? What additional information might you need to really understand these scenarios? Are there any criteria missing that you want to think about kind of going back to that guiding principle idea. A few things have changed. I think I added something onto our last slide there. And then hopefully we're going to get some next steps. And one of those might be, is there anything we want to consider removing tonight? And tonight might not be the night because it's an informational night. So those are questions that I want you to be thinking about as we're going through the different scenarios. So what you have in front of you is the slide deck that kind of details some scenarios, but you also have this crazy two-pronged spreadsheet that has the enrollment data for all current enrollment data for all 6 scenarios. So at different times, I'm going to ask you to look at the slide and then to get into the spreadsheet. Okay, because it was too complicated to combine them into one. So scenario 1 is Bullis Charter School's entire K-8 program at the 10th site. So we don't really see that operating expenses on our end, that there would be any change for that. Capital expenses, we're going to table that for the future because those estimates are old. But you can see in 2020 what the projected cost for that was. This includes 1,057 students. I want to be really clear, that's their current numbers, but we know in our CEQA process right now that the capacity that we're pushing through CEQA is a 900 student campus. So just keep that in mind.
Also, just to note for people who are new to this process, we're legally obligated to provide facilities for their in-district students.
Correct.
Which is 960 something, I think, if I remember the figure, but it's
My spreadsheet.
lower than the 1057.
965. Correct.
But they are also allowed to cram as many students as they want.
Sorry,
For
apologies.
the allotted
Apologies for the
facilities.
interruption.
Yeah,
Yeah,
but
No, no,
they
it's
can't
not
go over
okay.
900.
Or,
Not
yes.
based on the CEQA.
correct.
There's another thing here, capital expenses.
Yep.
That assumes that we're going to be building a new school there. We don't necessarily have to build a new school.
Absolutely.
So perhaps we could,
I'm sorry,
Yeah.
can you clarify this?
Yeah.
How do we host BCS at K-8 at the 10th site without building a new school?
portables.
There might be enough space to do field space, I don't think. But that's something we'd have to look at, understand where you're going. Question.
Yeah, so when we get those costs, I think, depending, there may be a variety of costs, but it also includes the cost of building removal at Egan, which is substantial, right? The number of buildings over there, if they were to all, in this scenario, if they were all to be at the 10th site. So projected campus enrollment numbers for us, this is really status quo, right? This is moving Bullis Charter School from their Block and Egan campuses to the new 10th site in some configuration. So it does not change our numbers inherently. But it could, if the board was interested in moving to the middle school model, it would certainly allow, but that's on my next slide, so I will get there.
So,
yes.
sorry, go back a second. So that very last line there, middle school possible in Q3 2026, that's our middle school.
Correct.
Okay.
Correct. So we'll talk about what are some possible enhancements of this scenario. One is that having that additional space at both of our junior highs does allow for middle school conversion. We've looked to see if it's possible for us to do it at both sites right now, and I do not believe it's possible between the space and the sharing agreements that are happening. We know if we moved 6th grade to the middle school model, this would allow for more site allocation for our expanded TK program. I want us to be thinking about the possibilities of a preschool program. And I also know something else coming down the pike for all of our schools in California is our wellness centers, which will be other facility needs at every campus. So those are some pieces to keep in mind. Obviously, this has the least impact on LASD schools. There's no need to close a school, relocate a school, or share a school in any way. One idea that has really not been hashed out in any way, but has been talked about is, could we use that current BCS location at Egan if all of those portables were removed for affordable teacher housing or staff housing? We know that the state laws have changed to make that a little bit of an easier process for school districts. And might this be a chance for Bullis Charter School to serve a more diverse population that more closely resembles our student population based on the location of the 10th site? Possible.
I'll be in smoke. All right, never mind.
Okay. Challenges, it may limit, I think this goes to Steve's point earlier, not thinking about this as a permanent location, but we want to make sure that we maintain flexibility. And we know that that is the fastest growing according to our last demographer report, but certainly with housing over there, it is our fastest growing area within the district. So we want to maintain that flexibility. And depending on what type of school was built on the 10th site, we will not have funds to do any other projects at our school sites, and we'll learn more about those financial pieces in December. So that is scenario one. Any questions on scenario one, or you want to move through the scenarios and then we're going to get into discussion? Seems like a better practice. Yeah, you can take some notes and make some comments and questions on your page. So scenario two is Bullis Charter School, either either K5 or K6 at the 10th site, and 6-8 or 7-8 continues at Egan. So kind of their elementary program at the 10th site and their junior high or middle school program would remain at Egan. This is scenario two. Again, for us, I don't believe in operating expense that there's really any difference. We certainly will have future costs around capital expenses. This also allows us a little bit of flexibility potentially at the site. So I did put some enrollment numbers up there, and these are current. These are based on current enrollment numbers. So Egan would look like if Egan had a middle school, 6-8 LASD students and 6-8 BCS students, we would have 993 students. You following me there? Okay, I'm gonna go down on the little chart up here. Actually, I'm gonna take it back. I'm gonna go across. If we stayed only at 7-8 for Egan, that number goes down to 780. So that top line of going across is 7-8 Egan, 6-8 BCS. The next line down there, you can see if we just go 7-8, I don't need to go through all the numbers for you, you can read. And then you can see what the numbers are at the 10th site, which are both below the 900 capacity. And again, the timeline is a little up in the air. Possible enhancements. This does allow for middle school conversion of just sharing those specialized facilities, more space at our elementary schools for TK and possible preschool, and maybe some wellness centers. There is still some impact on LASD with Egan sharing just for that junior high component. We know that that is a challenge, has been a challenge historically since that sharing has started, but it would certainly be much less than the current sharing needs. Of course, this would include no school closures or no schools relocated in LASD. It would likely result in lower construction costs because we would be building a smaller school to house students on the 10th site. perhaps they could serve a more diverse population in that area. Again, the challenges, I think, remain similar. That last one up there is, Egan would still be sharing, but Block would not have sharing. Is that an inequity? That's more of a question than a statement. Scenario 3 is something that I believe was talked about right around February or March of 2020, which is a flip. Keeping Bullis Charter School at the Egan campus and moving Egan to the 10th site. Again, probably no difference in operating costs. We'll have to figure out what the capital expense costs are. And then you can see on the spreadsheet or up here of what that might look like. So if Egan remained just a 7-8 school, we'd have 497. That's our current Egan population. If we moved it to a 6-8 over at the 10th site, we'd have 710 students. And then of course, BCS depends on enrollment. Long-term viability. This certainly would enable us to move to a middle school model at both junior highs. Moving 6th graders provides that additional space. There's no school sharing, there's no school closure. There is just a move of school. Another possible enhancement is that any of the funds built to build a new school is for an LASD school, which gives us a school in our fastest growing area of the district. Could also allow for affordable teacher housing at that site. Of course, challenges as this was floated in the past. There was some community opposition, or maybe more than some community opposition about relocating Egan. And I think this is the language that's been up there since 2020, but it cedes our largest campus to Bullis Charter School. And yeah.
For the two, if we were to move forward with the
Yes.
affordable housing, then we'd be shrinking the size of that campus and therefore we didn't want to scale it.
There you go.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Just wanted to clarify.
So that is scenario 3. And here's now where they all get a little bit more complicated. So get ready. Scenario 4, moving Bullis Charter School to the Egan campus permanently, moving Egan to Covington School, which would mean closing the existing Covington School and creating a new LASD school at the 10th site. So again, operating expenses are probably no different because we would have the same number of folks that operate a school. And this is where we really need to move into the spreadsheet to look at what those numbers might look like for scenario 4, which is on the right of that top page there. This is all guesstimates, I would say, right? Using a percentage of students who, from the last demographers report, we knew lived in that north of El Camino area. So I use the same percentage with updated enrollment numbers, if that makes sense. So you can see off to the right there of how many students for north of El Camino would move to that new school site, how many Covington students would be rerouted to one of our existing elementary schools. So I'll let you just take a moment and look through there.
So the numbers that we have on the spreadsheet don't include, if I'm correct, if I read correctly, scenario 4 don't include middle school conversions, because the numbers for Covington.
That's correct.
All the same. Okay.
But if you look over to the right-hand side of that front page, the third column there is the middle school numbers.
Okay.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But yeah, it was too complicated to do like every possible scenario. I can do it in the future if we get closer to a solution, but yeah. So you can see that would mean a new 10th site elementary school would have roughly 400 students based on our current enrollment.
One of the things that you haven't included in these scenarios is your opinion of the effect of instruction.
Programmatic
Yeah.
impact.
Programmatic.
Yeah.
I know that in the past, one of the objections to having K-6 NEC students at the 10th site has been the fear that the district would be split into two. And that's certainly one way to look at it.
I think we'll have more of a sense when we get an updated demographers report around,
Well, the actual number of students doesn't matter. It's
but the population
the
of
population.
students, right?
On the other hand, another way of looking at it is that this is a real challenge for us to make sure that those students actually do as well as every other students. I just want to point that out.
So if we think about scenario 4, which is much more complex, it certainly does enable middle school conversion. There's no school sharing. We would be using funds to build a new LASD school. We have some junior high facilities here at Covington, so I'm sure there would still be some needs, but not as many needs. It does place an elementary school in our fastest growing area and could still afford or enable teacher housing over at Egan. But if we look at the challenges, you can see, once again, this includes a school relocation and a school closure. The notes in here talked about Covington would need to close at least 2 years before the 10th site opens to allow for construction at Covington, to allow for the move to Covington before we redid the other pieces. Like it couldn't happen all at the same time.
Why not? I mean, the San Francisco airport did a complete redesign and kept working the whole time.
Yeah, I think we would need to look more closely what the construction needs were.
Okay.
Would possibly disrupt the education happening if it's constructed upon while the kids are here. It would be a programmatic possibly issue. I can foresee.
So
Yeah.
we can
Yeah, I think that's the question for the details later.
Yeah.
note that Los Altos High School has construction ongoing now.
For sure, I sure do. A note here just about having our 2 junior highs somewhat close together might impact traffic, walking, biking. And then does that potentially, but this is to Steve's earlier point, does it limit any flexibility, but maybe not if we have housing?
Does this allow for a swimming pool at Covington?
I don't think we're gonna dig that thing up.
Neighbors would love that.
All right, scenario 5. Willis Charter School moves to Covington. Covington is closed. And a new elementary school is created at the 10th site, which is slightly different, right, than scenario 4, which was BCS moving to Egan, Egan coming here, closing Covington. So this is slightly less of a move. You can look at those numbers if you flip to scenario 5 on your spreadsheet. Again, these are somewhat theoretical based on those percentages from the past demographers report. We'll have better numbers hopefully in January. Again, we'd have about 400 students at a new 10th site elementary school.
Sandra, can
Yep.
I just ask, the capital expenses for this one, does it include moving the district office? And perhaps rebuilding it somewhere else?
Great question. It doesn't say that it does up there, but I'm looking at, that would probably be an additional expense,
Yeah.
right?
I don't think so.
Yep. Yeah, we'll add that on for next time.
I can imagine that we might want to move the district office, but we don't have to, right?
I think we'd have to look at the design for, you know,
I mean, we could, I think we could put a fence around this, for instance, if we wanted to.
absolutely. So all those numbers are dependent on middle school, no middle school, how many students are really living north of El Camino, but it gives you a sense of what that might look like. This does allow for middle school conversion. There is no school sharing. Construction funds are for an LASD school, gives us an LASD elementary school in that fastest growing area. Once again, this does include a school closure. We would need to redraw attendance areas for elementary schools to absorb the Covington students and potentially limit some flexibility for space.
Wouldn't this have the same construction issues you had on the last one, or how can you do Covington construction?
Yeah.
That needs to be put in.
Yeah. We'll add that in. And then scenario 6. This is a theoretical scenario, but in the spreadsheet, I've chosen to make it a little bit more real. But this is moving Bullis Charter School to one of our existing elementary schools, not named in the big scenario. And then whatever elementary school that is, they would share with one of our junior high schools. And then we would have a new LASD elementary school at the 10th site. So for example, in the spreadsheet, I selected Santa Rita. So in theory, you could think of Bullis Charter School moving to Santa Rita moving into the Bullis Charter School existing campus on the Egan site and coexisting there. And this would then mean opening a 10th elementary school, oh, sorry, 8th elementary school and a 10th school at our 10th site. So this would be 11 schools on 10 sites. This is the one that actually does increase our operating expenses because this would be running an additional school. So Randy at the time said that would be probably at least $1 million to operate an additional school. We'll look at the costs later, and you can look through the enrollment there to see what that might look like. You know, I'm rethinking that top one. I do question whether this enables middle school conversion over at Egan. I think that would be a whole lot of, there's less of the sharing difficulty that is happening between Bullis Charter School and the junior highs right now, because it would be our own students, right? We wouldn't have to share like we're sharing right now, but I think it would be actually a challenge to accommodate all 6th grade students at Egan in this scenario. Would be a lot of students on that one big property. So I will change that for the future.
We would only really allow it for that one school.
Correct. Yeah, and that doesn't feel right.
No, that's
Uh,
not equitable.
Yes. So again, we would be building a new elementary school. It was thought maybe there might be some programmatic benefits of having an LASD elementary school sharing the Egan site. Some challenges. Yeah. you can see the challenges
So,
there.
On the programmatic benefits, the number of K5 or K6 and 6A or 7-8 schools is quite a bit less than the number of K8 schools in California, right?
Correct.
So just from those numbers, one would expect that there are some programmatic benefits to bring that. And I don't know what they are, but I would just expect that to be the case.
In those scenarios, aren't those the same populations going K8, whereas this is not that case?
Yeah, this is
This
really
becomes a
too-
small subset of kids going K5 at that site, and then an influx of population to add to it for 6, 7, 8 is what you're doing. So unlike the K8 you're comparing to it normally, this is a very different model.
Yeah, this model is 2 separate schools. Right, one of our own elementary schools.
The way it was, when it was
Right.
the camp school.
Correct,
Yes,
correct.
yes.
yes,
Different elementary every year on that. So
Right. Bridget was great enough to give us an updated, this was a slide from back in 2020, but we added some updated numbers here. So if you look at our different elementary attendance areas, you can see the top number is the number of students who live within that attendance boundary. So for example, Gardner Bullis, 100 students attend Bullis Charter School who reside within the Gardner Bullis attendance area. And then we have 263 students at that school. Does that make sense? So you can look to see those numbers. I think in the past, we've had the ability with the demographer to get a little bit more detail on the numbers of students in north of El Camino. So we hope that we'll be able to get that detail for you in January.
We hear out there, not that it makes too much of a difference with the junior high numbers.
yeah, sorry.
Yes.
Sorry, is this
Say that
all,
again.
is this all LASD, like students, so for the Santa Rita example, is that 178 students in K through 6 attending DCS? Or is that 178 students
That's a good
K through
question.
8 attending? And similarly for the LASD number,
think-
is that
Yes,
384 students attending
Yeah.
Santa Rita or Santa Rita and Egan?
the top number I think might be inclusive of K8.
Oh.
Our number is the number at that school.
Oh,
So yeah, I'm not comparing apples to
Oh.
apples there.
okay.
We can work on that for round 2.
It's like you haven't done this before.
Right? Yeah, I'm working on other people's slides and things, yeah.
Yeah, the last
Not
slide was
my-
terrible.
So I'll go back to, those are your 6 scenarios and a little bit of analysis, so much more to come, but an opportunity. I know Vladimir already brought up a couple of things, but are there some scenarios we want to add, we want to modify, we want to get rid of? What further information? So we talked about what's coming in December with the financials and the demographic report in January. What else is helpful for you? And then I did write down here, because when we were originally talking about this, TK was very theoretical and some people doubted it would ever happen. Well, it's happening and it's here. So we know that our TK expansion is mandated. I feel confident that wellness centers will be coming to all of our schools. The expectation is that we will have.
Can you explain the wellness center too? Because I'm not sure everyone knows, and I probably have a version that's not accurate.
Yeah, so a wellness center is similar. So through our SCLS coordinator, Catherine, you've met Catherine, at several schools with around our county and throughout the state, those SCLS coordinators work with the on-site mental health professionals. So CHAC in our case, or some of our El Camino therapists, and they have a space to be able to serve students, to talk with families. And it's really intended, and the state is subsidizing the costs of these centers, both the staffing, probably just the staffing, I was going to say, and the facilities, but that's probably very unlikely. But the staffing. So it's really a space for staff, for students, and for families to come for resources.
It's all mental health, wellness only, it's not physical, it's just.
Mental health and wellness, like community services. So it would include like access to healthcare if you're needing translation services or food services, kind of like a community schools-ish idea.
How big do you think those centers need to be?
That I don't know.
Sorry.
I can't hear you.
Oh, I'm just asking how big those centers need to be. What physical size do you think they would be?
That I do not know. I can look because I do know that we have existing ones popping up within our county. So I would be curious, is it just one classroom? Is it more like a library sized facility? Is it a series of classrooms? Is it, yeah, I don't know the
In
answer.
our
to that.
current stuff, which like we do a chat with other things, we move into that.
Correct. And right now they're in, you know, a small little room, usually within the office. And this is more of a center, so we might have 3 staff members in there. Makes me think about room 31 here over at Covington, I think was designed with this idea of a wellness center in mind. So we have 4 office spaces and a bigger conference space, and then kind of a welcome center for resources. If people just need to find information, that there would be information there.
The junior highs currently have drop-in spaces. don't
They have their Zen dens
Yes.
or what have you. I think it would need to be bigger than that.
Yes, but I'm
Yeah.
saying, could that be a component of this?
Absolutely. Yep.
Sandra, one addition I think that we need to make to some of the scenarios, definitely scenario 1 and the scenario 3, I'm not sure. And maybe all is under capital expenses. One thing we need to take into account is the interest that we're paying on the bonds. That's actually an expense that should be allocated to whatever site that it goes to.
Interest on the bonds, I think of the leases of portables, right? There's lots of different things. We'll try to be encompassing.
So they're gonna be the same.
Yeah.
All,
I'm not sure I
all
understand.
scenarios are gonna, it's gonna be the
That point.
same. with that.
The point is that if, in scenario 1, for instance,
Uh-huh.
if BCS goes to the new site, then all of that interest is being paid for BCS's benefit. Whereas in other scenarios, at least some of the benefit we get. So the cost of us putting BCS on the site is not only the capital expenses of the bond measure needed to to buy the site and to build, but also the interest on the bond.
The interest is paid by the taxpayers. Right, like we don't, that's not money that I take your point about money being spent on LASD students versus BCS students, but I don't think I understand how interest comes into it because it's just.
So I actually don't know where that money, I mean, it ultimately, it all comes out of taxpayer, right?
Right, we issue bonds and gets added to the property tax bill.
Then don't we have to pay interest on that bond?
The taxpayers.
The taxpayer, it's part of the levy on the tax bill.
As opposed to a general participation bond, which is something we can issue bonds that we then pay from our general fund, but we try really hard not to do that.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Fine. It's still an expense, right? Where the money comes from, it's still an expense. Because if you say it doesn't matter, then effectively you're saying that the levy on the taxpayers.
It's just a constant against, it's a constant across all scenarios.
No, because at least scenario 1, all the benefit goes to BCS.
Yes.
But there's, that to what you're ignoring, I understand what you're saying about the benefit of the building goes to BCS in this case, for a while at least, while they occupy it. But down the road, I mean, what it does, there's a benefit for the district to actually move to middle school model, which we can't do today, by moving them to their own campus. There's the benefit of the non-sharing at the existing school sites. Those are benefits that are hard to monetize, but they are still benefits.
Yeah.
And so
So-
we're being impacted by those today. How we run sheet.
One way of estimating the cost or the benefit of going to the municipal model is asking the reverse question. how much would we want to get paid to abandon the middle school? And we can ask ourselves that question, and then we can sort of like begin to estimate what the benefit of us doing that is. Because it is a
So,
benefit. to us.
well, so I'd actually, on the subject of the middle school model, this is something that we've talked about repeatedly for a long time on this board. In previous years, the previous times it's been discussed as a, we could do this, we could not do this, there are pros and cons. I would actually love to see an updated report on the impact that declining enrollment is going to have on our programs in 6th, 7th, and 8th grade,
Yeah,
because
they're feeling it. already.
anecdotally, they're feeling it already, and they're going to be significant. So just to throw some things out there, when we talked about this before in 2020, Covington had 4 6th grade classrooms.
Yep.
Only Gardner, Bullis, and Loyola had 2. Everybody else had 3.
Yep.
This year, only Covington has 3 6th grade classrooms. Everybody else has 2. And we have 2 schools with fewer than 30 kindergartners. So I think actually, to Vladimir's question about, what would we charge for not moving to middle school? I'm not sure that it's an option to not move to middle school model. Because I'm really concerned about our 6th, 7th, and 8th program maintaining those things in 2 or 4 years. So I think we need to sort of get a formal informed report, not just based on anecdata.
Carrie
about-
will be thrilled to do her first middle school model. We'll work
This
together.
has been a graveyard of many assistant superintendents.
Because I think we do need clarity
Yep.
for us and the community about whether there is wiggle room there. And if there's not, then I think we need to say that formally. We've never formally, as a board, approved that shift because it's never been possible because of BCS placement.
So it actually comes up a little bit later on when there was in one of the scenarios, I forget which one it was, where Egan was treated differently from Block.
Mhm.
It's potentially the case that we could have a middle school model at Block and keep the K, the 7, 8 at Block. And give people the choice of whether to go here or there. Because I know that there are some people, I don't know what the percentage is. There are some people who don't think it's the right thing to do for their child. And it could be 5%, it could be 25%, whatever.
Right, but I think, as I said, that's why we need to inform it
Yeah,
based
no, we
on
want
our
to
enrollment
understand
numbers,
the
because when we had
programmatic.
those discussions, a lot of schools had 3 or 4 classrooms, so their children were getting, so their 6th graders were getting 3 or 4 teachers and we're rotating among classrooms, whether it's at the elementary school or at the junior
Yeah,
high. If we
no,
get
no,
down
I
to
agree.
1.5 6th grade sections, it's going to be a very different experience.
What
Can I
else,
make another
folks?
comment?
Yep.
So I think whether this matters depends on which scenarios we get into in more detail, but based on prior discussions, I'd sort of be surprised if an LASD elementary school at the 10th site were zoned as everybody north of El Camino. I think it's far more likely, especially if you go back and look at the map, that it would basically be zoned with that crossings and the north end of Almond.
Mhm.
And then if, say, Covington were being relocated, you would divide Covington up between Almond and Springer and do it that way based on, both based on geography, based on demographics from some discussions we've had before. So whether we need to get into that detail, I don't know. But I just wanted to make that comment.
I'll bring an updated version of this to make sure we're looking at K6 to K6, if we can. Or K to K.
Any other information you need to collect for us? Would you pick what we're looking for as far as any other missing information?
Will the demographers, sorry, will the demographers report include projections?
I assume it will. Yep, because they're looking at all of the housing factors, the birth rate factors, all of those pieces looking forward.
I don't know if this matters much, but just looking through the various capital expenses, because you made a comment that building removal was a significant expense. And I'm not sure whether we should include that or not, just because in some scenarios, I mean, we've talked about possible teacher housing in the long term, but that would be a very,
Yeah.
that would be a long-term project. It seems like the community need for preschool and daycare and everything else is always, higher than the demand. So if we vacated that portion of the Eden campus, I'm sure we could find a tenant for those buildings. So I'm not sure it makes sense to include that cost in the implementation number. I'd still potentially like to know what it is, but
And if there's any continued rent of some of those, that could be.
I had one question about the question, Brian, about the demographer. We did a 3-year agreement with them, so what we'll do is we'll be able to get updated numbers for this year. And as things change in the next 2 years, we'll be getting updated numbers, especially with the new housing. So I think that will help us give us more information as well.
Right.
Eric, do you have, now that you've had a chance to go through this stuff, sort of a high level, Eric, too, like, do you guys have any questions for the board about where aspects of this came from, or want more clarity from us? So, about anything?
Unless he wants to know as little as possible.
No, I think it's super helpful to see the background, and how it's kind of evolved over the last several years. And I think it's a good context of where it's kind of started.
This is a study session. If anyone in the audience has any comments or questions, please let us know.
One issue I wondered about for additional information to consider was whether the Mountain View restrictions are factored in. Like, are there restrictions that have to be considered for the different scenarios? The other item I thought is a couple of the scenarios talked about factoring in this possible benefits that BCS can improve its demographics. And I wonder if that should be considered more strongly across all of the scenarios. That's a significant consideration. And for the 10 site sharing, the example used was to break BCS by grade level into a K5 or K6 school on the 10th site. It could also be broken the way it's currently broken into 2 K8 schools, and maybe they wouldn't be the same size. And just comparing, so breaking it into a junior high or a middle school would be more like the LASD model. But considering what the LASD requirements are to provide them space, especially based on size, like in terms of what LASD schools kind of look like, and so what they can reasonably expect. And then just a general comment, I've heard a lot about the middle school conversion, so I don't know how far down the road the district is with that, but I just want to put a plug in for junior highs because they've been so successful, and especially in contrast to other districts locally, like everybody loves the LASD junior highs, and comments from other very successful districts like Palo Alto, many parents are not, basically think their middle schools are the weak link in that educational program.
I just want to comment for anybody who, again, is new to this process. When we talk about BCS, various grades at various places, that's a BCS board decision, not our decision. We include that stuff just because we have to provide certain different facilities. Obviously, a kindergartner needs different facilities than a middle schooler. And so we look at those scenarios, not because we can mandate that BCS has certain students in certain places, but to sort of look at where we can provide the facilities that we have to provide as a whole. So just
And
wanted
I
to
would jump
make
on
that-
with that historically, that's not held for us either, because we actually did try when we set up block, that it was going to be a very different population than is there today. So,
And I appreciate her talking about the constraints of what we have from Mountain View. That is something not currently in the stuff tonight.
I'm sorry.
It's always the constraints that we have with Mountain View. When we bought the 10th site, we
Oh.
said that we would put a neighborhood school or a choice or charter school with a neighborhood preference.
Yeah.
And in order to, as part of it.
So what we really have to do is at least apply a probability to that. Whether or not BCS would agree to a neighborhood preference. And one of the ways typically,
Well, sorry.
one of the ways you typically do that is you give a range that you think the real number is in with 90% probability. What are you gonna say?
I was gonna say, I mean, I think it's a question I have is the path forward, because I think rather than trying to assign probabilities of what BCS might do, I think it'd be better to just have a dialogue with them at some point when we're,
Sure, that would,
when we
work.
agree
That
amongst
would
ourselves.
increase the probability percentage. Especially if we get agreed.
One way or the other.
well, back to your point, though, there's a conversation that would have to be had with all the players that impact our choices, which would include Steve. So that's the factors we have to weigh. Any, so of the existing sites, are there any other details or information you need on those specifically?
So there's another sort of wild idea I have. I don't know, again, how feasible it is. And it could easily be, that Sandra would be the one who have to make the call on this. I think. Or maybe not, but anyway, the idea is that just abandon attendance boundaries. And we let people go to whatever school they want to go to. And you see where things fall out. We put let's say we put a LASD elementary school on the 10th site, we decide to do it that way, and then we just see where people want to go. And the only thing that I can say, I mean, we expend a lot of energy, and the community spends a lot of energy on attendance boundaries. And it's possible to get rid of it. The community colleges are not going to. You can go to any community college you want. And they have.
So what, that seems unrelated to this discussion, frankly.
Well, so there was one of the scenarios, I think, where it said that we have to change the attendance boundaries. At least one of the scenarios, we have to change the attendance boundaries. And we may want to do that anyway. Who knows?
So one of the things that just as an anecdotal approach, if you look at this one, number 2 on there, one of the strong feedbacks we got throughout this process was the neighborhood school model was something that's appreciated and liked about the way we structured the district. As we went to back to school night or the new family night, and so those conversations, again, it was the fact that it doesn't matter which school I go to, I'm getting the same academic experience and approaches throughout the whole thing district. So unlike, so the idea of abandoning that, actually,
No. People would go to their neighborhood school.
you're assuming that.
Yeah,
Well, if they don't want to go to the neighborhood school, then
And they
we're
come-
forcing them to.
No, but they come and apply and ask, can we accommodate, and they go through those steps, and it's not a huge lift to take away. I think by walking away from that, I think you are opening a Pandora's box of other potential issues down the road of people walking away from schools that might currently carry the weight of social economic disadvantage students. Carry those types of issues. And I'm very concerned about the idea of creating those pockets. So personally, I wouldn't be excited about throwing that into the mix. Personally, that's just mine. take on it.
One of the big things that came out at the information night, what you're getting with our schools is not just the academics, it's the whole community around the child, right? And a lot of that community, I think, comes from the fact that there are attendance boundaries. And you are going, you're playing at the Almond Playground on the weekends, which is where you go to school, which is where you see your friends. And it just, there's this whole lovely thing that you can't really put a number or a price tag on, which creates this sense of emotional and mental safety, I think, for our kids. And that the parents also feel like, wow, we didn't know that we're also gonna get this community as well. And I think that's what makes our schools so special. And I would like to see us protect that, And so, yes, definitely part of that is protecting the small neighborhood school model. And that's why I would not really like to get rid of attendance boundaries and have it be kind of a little free for all.
Speaking of new families, a number of there were teachers and students and parents also spoke. And there were a number of them at the Garden Woods, which is the small school we have. They really liked the smallness of the school. And that was a little bit surprising to me because, you have the school that's really small, you don't have as much opportunity to do sort of like things on the periphery that you would have if you had a larger population there. But they seem, they really like that small, where everybody knows everybody. By the way, I did not expect a rousing, oh, let's go for it. So,
I get the bad looks when I suggest we change attendance boundaries. So
yeah, but you would avoid all
there you go.
that.
I think it also like, they're not saying it, but it's a logistics nightmare for the district office
Oh, yeah.
to then fix everybody. Today, I'm feeling like almond.
I just wanted to say, just as a reminder, when we were campaigning for Measure N, one of the things we said was 10 schools, 10 sites. And I feel like scenario 6, 11 schools on 10 sites, I feel like that doesn't honor the intent of what we wanted to do.
Yeah.
So I am least inclined.
Yeah.
To go with scenario 6.
As am I. I think it is the most complicated, and again, having run Measure N with you,
Exactly.
I know exactly what we said, and this is not anywhere near what we said.
I think it's fine, because we're not in a normal meeting, we can't say don't do it, but is there any place you'd like people to focus on moving forward in terms of information, prioritize?
Don't focus on Sarah.
I think it's fine to give some direction to, we'll just put it off to the side right now as we continue to update scenarios, right? We got 40 something additional scenarios. Right.
Already.
Right.
Yeah.
There's no
Wait, no.
decision that we're making. We're only
Right.
saying, we're only taking one to just kind of put on a
Yeah,
side.
I mean,
burner.
We like it the least.
it was a stretch back in 2020, and given the changing reality of enrollment and funding and everything else, it makes less sense today than it did 2.5 years ago.
What makes this sense?
Scenario 6.
Scenario 6.
The other thing that, nights and weekends, Sandra, to have a matrix. And have all the scenarios ranked according to random principles.
We actually had something,
Yeah, that's
but we had something,
Point.
we had something.
Sorry, I need to
Like-
find that.
Well, it was part of like the March, I think it was like the March.
Yeah.
It was in a presentation. It wasn't a matrix per se, but it had like more of a narrative.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of these
No,
are.
we had that for March of
Okay.
2020, the meeting that did not happen.
for instance, 6F is, it has to be a narrative. You can't
Right.
never do that.
Yep.
Yeah, I know. But it's, I mean, I'm not sure that it's worth sort of going over the fine tooth comb at this point.
What's that?
I said, I'm not sure that sort of trying to update that document at this point is a high priority, just because a lot of it was the same, a lot of it's sort of duplicative, a lot of it's the same, a lot of it's, I mean, personally, I think a lot of, I don't want to minimize the concerns under number 6, but addressing those is sort of down in the implementation details for some of the scenarios as opposed to others, so.
For December, any other financial pieces that we haven't thought of?
It's just an organizational meeting.
Yes.
What is that?
Were
Oh,
you
I
planning on
just-
partying afterwards?
No,
I'm so depressed.
we'll have 2 big items on there.
We get through organization pieces relatively quickly.
And Marcy and I looked at a tentative agenda for December. There's not a lot of else on December, the organizational meeting. Remember, we were looking at this, so I think these can be in our meeting as perhaps 1 or 2 items, depending on what we're ready to share.
One
We'll
thing
have first interim also.
Oh, yeah.
That's really my question.
But that is
Other piece.
very, will help us for
Yeah,
every other piece, so.
Yeah.
One thing I'd like to know, and it might be more appropriate for the January 23rd meeting, is these scenarios, which one of them, because I personally feel like our enrollment's gonna go way back up again.
Sure.
Maybe not tomorrow.
Yeah.
But which one of these scenarios gives us the most flexibility, like when that happens? They don't want to box us into a situation where our enrollment is now going back up, but our whatever school site can't handle it.
This optimism is based on,
I won't tell you what I think of.
Historical cycles.
Yeah,
thank you.
Thank you,
All
thank you,
the-
historical
Sure.
cycles.
what goes up must come down, or
People
what
do
comes down must go up.
People then inspect the apartment buildings, older apartment buildings in Mountain View to give us so many students. And now that they're newer, there are less students, but that the
But
cycle.
Exactly,
Sure.
the cycle will come back up again.
So I remember that the older Markovitz report had a load factor associated with apartments based on age,
Yes,
average load factor. So it seems to me that the 12th will get some updated financials, which is great. On the 23rd, we'll get the Markovitz report, which will sort of give us a vision of the future. And we can digest those at the meetings. But then we need more after that in order to hash out.
Absolutely. Then you have like the most big picture available, right?
So where does middle school, additional middle school
Yeah, what-
enrollment that I can tell us factor into this schedule?
I wonder if maybe that's, we have a meeting January 9th. We have a meeting January 23rd. I think at either of those, we could bring something.
I mean, it's very demographic in a certain way, so it would make a certain amount of sense to combine it with the demographer report, as we're looking at enrollments.
Yeah.
Generally, but if it's ready on January 9th, then it
Then
would
we can
also be
have
good to have a preview of maybe on January, assuming you have time to get this done. If on January 9th, we could sort of in the abstract, look at how enrollment declines might impact the 6th and 7th, 8th
Yes.
programs. And then on the 23rd, when we have numbers out in the future, we can then process that
Yeah.
with the impacts. And then
Anything else, guys? Do you want to go over?
So I just,
Oh, I'm
go ahead.
sorry. And as part of that impact enrollment. Something else that we haven't, I don't think, talked about explicitly is if we did shift to the middle school model, what additional facilities would be required
Yep.
that block and Egan? So how much additional
Yep.
space over the next 5 years or something? Or if there's 5 years of the shift.
I just wanted to say that the very first report that we got was the superintendent's task force on enrollment and growth. And I thought that that was very well done, because for each one of the assumptions that was listed in the report, they gave a backup for why that assumption was a reasonable assumption to make. And that approach, I thought, it's almost, it's very hard to argue against that. I sort of like that.
know if that's something you can share with Mark, or so they can we see what we've seen in the past. And I don't know if they can structure their reports around that, or at least be able to help us address it moving forward. It was independent of the non-fish Brian. I think maybe moving forward, these people-
So I think, I guess what I was, if we decide this is what we're gonna do, what I'd like us to do is list out what our assumptions are.
Mhm.
And to back those assumptions up with some form of evidence. That's all.
Yeah.
Um,
Anything else, guys? If not, I think we could call this part of the meeting to. And what we're going to do is move into closed session. Anyone have any comments on our closed session agenda? Looks like.
Yeah,
not.
don't give us-
Then what we're gonna do is, we will turn into closed session. Thank you.
what's-